Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be covering Park Rangers again with this book, Underground Ranger. This is by Doug Thompson. There's a sticker in the bottom right part of the cover that says local author. I bought this used at Coas, but I suspect it was on sale at Coas or at some bookstore in New Mexico, or perhaps El Paso. This book is about the interpretive ranger Doug Thompson. He is writing a memoir about his times at Carlsbad Caverns National Park, which I felt was the right time to discuss this book because I am myself preparing for a day trip leading 12 airmen to Carlsbad Caverns National Park for work. I'm only going to be doing the main self-guided tour of the caverns, which is walking from the visitor center to the natural entrance down to the big room, and then the perimeter of the big room. If I'm feeling up for it, I may also walk back up, but just from the visitor center, or rather, from the natural entrance to the big room is 1.25 miles, and then the perimeter of the big room is itself another 1.25 miles, which makes it 2.5 miles of paved walkway in a beautiful national park. In chapter 1, Doug Thompson mentions that he had been a national park ranger for 22 years, and it had been a good career, but it hadn't prepared him for the challenges of Carlsbad Caverns. So this is a man that has been around the National Park Service for a while, and when he shows up, the first part of the book covers him learning the cave as an interpreter. And what I mean by that is, in the National Park Service, an interpreter is someone who takes, the cultural, the historical, the various stories about an area, and they convert it into a program that they can run for guests. On the front end, as a customer, you would see this as a guided tour. But on the back end, it is, the industry term is interpretation. So the first part of this book is mostly about interpreting the history and the cultural background of Carlsbad Caverns National Park into a story he can present to people. Part 2 of this book, simply titled Exploring, is more about Doug's adventures on the side as he worked at Carlsbad Caverns. So what I mean by that is he would go to different caves when he and other staff had the time in their schedules, and he would explore caves all up and down the area. The ridgeline that Carlsbad Caverns is part of is a limestone mountain chain, and because of the way limestone works, especially in places that used to be ocean or inland sea, a lot of water gets in, and when water mixes with the calcium and the other chemicals in the stone, it creates an acid that wears away and dissolves stone in making caves. And there's a lot of tiny caves dotted throughout those mountains that he spends time exploring and climbing through and just having little side adventures while working at the park. There's one adventure here that kind of stuck out to me. Two actually that really stuck out to me, but one that I can easily find while thumbing through this book. It involves a cave feature, an opening called Hell Below. And he states, "The 7-story drop seemed so intimidating that I was afraid to clip onto the rope, and throughout the descent I felt certain I was going to lose control of my descender and suffer the fate that had engulfed Satan in Milton's epic poem. Him the almighty power hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition. It was a long and fearful descent, yet somehow I made it to the bottom, where I suddenly realized we had reached the spot where Niemeyer and his friends had been trapped. That thought became so unnerving as we continued into the cave that I began to panic whenever we moved precariously along the edge of a deep pit, thinking I was going to slip and fall to my death. I kept pestering Lance and Ruth about how deep the pits were. At one point, overcome by fear, I momentarily refused to go any further. A short time later, when we had to jump across a narrow pit onto a large boulder with a treacherous slope, I couldn't bring myself to do it, and Lance had to send back Dave to help me. Things eventually became so stressful that I was ashamed to have my friends see how frightened I was. They were patient with me and tried to joke about it, but that made everything seem even more hopeless. My worst nightmare was coming true, and I could feel the terrifying darkness of hell closing in around me. A dungeon horrible on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed. Yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades. After exploring the cave for almost 11 hours, we finally started back to the surface. Yet for me, the nightmare continued. At the top of the 7-story climb, I managed to become stuck just below the anchor and couldn't pull myself over the lip for several minutes, even though it shouldn't have been difficult. All I could do was curse and flail until I began to feel my struggle was in vain, and I was destined to remain in hell below. Here their prison ordained in utter darkness and their portion set, as far removed from God and light of heaven, as from the center thrice to the utmost pole. I was greatly relieved when we finally emerged from the cave late that afternoon. Yet the experience had been so disheartening that I talked with Lance about it several days later. If I was serious about caving, I couldn't let something like that hold me back. He reassured me that almost everyone involved in caving eventually has some kind of freak-out experience in a cave. He had even had one himself, and he advised me not to worry about it. It was encouraging to hear him say that. When I took part in 2 other caving trips in the high Guads about a month later, each with a challenging drop, I didn't have any problem. This episode proved yet again that my attitude could determine the way I experience a cave. If I expect to meet only terror and the malevolence of hell underground, that's probably what I'll find. But if I challenge my fear and remain open to the limitless possibilities of discovery, I may experience the type of joy that can only be found in the all-encompassing beauty of the natural world. That passage is about a page front and back. It's beautiful writing that shares a weak point in his career as a caver, but it's almost like he was outside of his challenge zone, so to speak, where the comfort zone, where in between where you're comfortable and very capable of doing a task and where you're uncomfortable and cannot do that task. That middle ground is called a flow state, generally, where you are just challenged enough but confident enough to be able to do something and kind of get into a state of mental flow where what you are focusing on is doing the task, but you're doing it so well, everything seems to just slide by. He may have felt that flow state somewhere else down the line, but he certainly didn't feel it there. He was too challenged, and he managed to get out through his own skill, but it was terrifying and uneasy and anxious. He was able to do it, but it wasn't something where he could be comfortable doing it. And that fear, while doing something bold, doing something new, is always going to be part of learning a new skill. But as he discusses at the end of it, he has that moment with his friend, and his friend says everyone goes through it, and he reassures him. And so that kind of exploration, that kind of adventure is necessary for the development of a skill. And there are many other cave experiences he has in this book after that one moment of anxiety. So I would say overall, it's a fun book to read. It's very personal, but it's very good at presenting the information so that anyone can enjoy it. And really, that's the job of any interpretive ranger. I bought this book for $12.50. There was a copy at Coas when I bought this one that was also signed, but that one was close to $50, and I was not going to pay that. But this copy I got, $12.50, was definitely worth it, and it inspired me to seek out an extracurricular in my own work as a recreational professional, to go through the National Association of Interpreters and get the first level of certification to add something to my resume. And I think it's really helped me in my current job, and it would have helped me in previous jobs. And I think that kind of inspiration, what he did was peel back those first layers and really inspired me to keep going in that recreational profession when I was at a low point, and it helped me find something new. So I hold this book dear to my heart because it is one of, I think, 3 or 4 on my shelf that covers being a park ranger. And of those, this is definitely one of the ones that is less naturally philosophic or medical emergency in theming. It is just adventures and presenting them to you as a reader so that you can enjoy those adventures too. And I think you will. Underground Ranger by Doug Thompson is a great book. I think you all should read it when you get the chance. If you find it at your bookstores, definitely buy it. My name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.